Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. For those of you here for the first time, we welcome you. For those of you who have joined us before, welcome back. My name is Herman Chen. I lead our market access and analytics team here at Magnolia Market Access, and I will be your gracious host today. Before we jump in, as quick background, we've been doing these monthly webinars for the past couple of years or so, which are open to everyone. They're intended to be informative, educational, and maybe even get you thinking about market access a little different, or unique ways. Each month, we pick a topic, in the pharmaceutical industry that we feel is relevant and interesting to our audience. And arguably, no hotter topic seems to be dominating all the airways right now than artificial intelligence. So our session this month is about AI and healthcare research, emerging trends, and real world applications. The way that we see it here, it's not a matter of whether we should fear AI, right, or embrace it unconditionally. The focus should be on how we deal and work with it. Because truth be told, right, like John Connor isn't coming to save us from Skynet, like in the Terminator movies, right? He probably doesn't have to. And who knows, maybe Skynet wouldn't have been all that bad with a little more human conditioning and a little TLC, right? So, we should be evaluating AI use cases and thinking about the questions we should ask and learning about AI in the various capacities because the reality is that not only is it here, but all indications are that it's here to stay. All right. Joining me on today as panelists are a couple of my colleagues from Magnolia, as well as fellow associates from our parent company, Medical Knowledge Group, Christy Melo, Chief AI Officer at MKG, our very own Amanda Forys, who many of you probably already know from our webinar series. She's a managing partner at Magnolia Market Access. Also from Magnolia, Anna Hunt Golden, Senior Director, and Susan Abady, Chief Strategy Officer at MKG and 81QD, which is another company in the MKG organization. For our agenda today, Christy is going to start us off by sharing some thoughts and perspectives on AI and trends in healthcare. Then Amanda and Anna will then delve into AI and market access, and then we'll broaden it back up to a roundtable discussion with Susan and the other panelists about AI in the pharma world. So thanks again for everyone for joining, and I'll turn it over to Christy. Christy, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Can you, yeah, turn it over to the slide. So I'm Christy, Chief AI Officer here at MKG. I have a background doing ML for care management for 6 years, and then background even before this, building out AI-driven market research and strategy platforms. So it's just, I guess, the 2 seconds on me, but I think we can jump into the next slide. We can go through some trends that are happening. Okay, so I think maybe this is obvious, but AI in healthcare is here and it's here to stay, as you sort of mentioned. It's no longer really whether it's going to be here. It's where, how, and with what guardrails. So I tried to pull together a couple interesting metrics to share. These are just some top line items. So $1.4 billion being spent US healthcare AI spend in 2025, which is 3 times what it was the year prior, and we're only seeing that increase in 2026. Of that, providers drove 75% of that, and payers were under 4%. We also have seen come out of IQVIA that 19 of 20 top global pharma companies have begun incorporating IQVIA AI agents into their commercial workflows. And 69% of market researchers report using synthetic AI in their research in the last year. So I think all of these are kind of interesting metrics that speak to some of the trends and things that are going on. The story with all of this is that, the money is real, the deployment is real. Methodology debates are what's happening, and what's not uniform yet is really the discipline around where AI is and is not appropriate, especially for high stakes decisions. So next slide. Okay. In terms of the sort of 3 forces we're seeing shaping AI in healthcare and that I think have relevance and significance to market access, Yeah, here an overview basically of a couple of key things that have been coming up really in the past 6 week window, really at the start of this year. Um, Guiding principles for AI in drug development. So in January of this year, the FDA and the EMA jointly released 10 principles for AI use in drug development. This is building on the framework that kind of came up, a 7-step framework that came up in 2025. And we're still waiting on final FDA guidance in Q2 of 2026. So obviously it's Q2 now. This will be an interesting one to keep a pulse on and keep a lookout for in June, assuming they stick to when they say they're going to have their final guidance. So this is one to be watching for. And in terms of why it matters for market access, basically, regulators expect AI used in submissions to be documented and validated. So not just, showing your work, not just the output. Increasingly, validation is becoming critical for all of these AI workflows and processes. So I think that's the main takeaway there. Um, AI in prior authorization is live in Medicare, and this is an interesting one, especially given what happened with United Healthcare, in the private sort of space. CMS launched the WISER model, which is Wasteful and Inappropriate Service Reduction model, at the start of this year across 6 different states, a 6-year pilot where they're using AI to review prior authorization across 13 service categories. That being said, every denial, every AI suggested, I guess, denial still requires licensed clinician review. This is an interesting one, especially again, given the United Healthcare lock-in case. It'll be cool to see how this plays out, but AI is now part of how Medicare says yes or no to coverage. There's still the unresolved tension there, so this space is developing quickly. Another critical piece is the IRA, so the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Late January of this year, the CMS announced iPay 2028. There's already iPay 2027, but iPay 2028, this is the first time that that Part B is being included for renegotiation, and that includes a lot of injectables like Botox. First ever also negotiation for Tradjenta. And those prices will be effective January 1st of 2028. So this one matters a lot because pharma teams are now having to rebuild their financial and access models, taking in more scenarios, tighter timelines, higher stakes to address iPay and the IRA. Yeah. So overall, really what we're looking at here are 3 forces, essentially showing that the work is getting more complex and more time sensitive as AI is becoming increasingly more prevalent, but also more defensible. So again, I think defensibility and validation are kind of the key threads going through all of this. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think this one is the one I'll be most direct about. So in terms of what's actually working and what's hype. So really cutting through a lot of the hype and noise that we're seeing with AI right now. Things that are real and working in production are, health economics and outcomes research and real world evidence acceleration. So the use of AI to reduce cycle times in these areas is definitely something that's actively happening. Same is true for dossier and value story drafting at really every major value demonstration vendor. Increasingly, as we already talked about, IRA negotiation, scenario modeling. So all the top pharma companies are running proprietary models under the IRA against iPay 2027 and 2028 drug lists to sort of accommodate these changes. And then agentic content production. This one's, I think, prevalent and fairly obvious, but multi-step brand creation workflows, leveraging AI to accelerate the delivery of a greater quantity of quality output, right? But then when it comes to hype, there is a lot of hype. So one that I've seen is AI replacing primary research. Obviously, as we saw from like the first slide that I had, synthetic research is being incorporated across the board, but um, you know, full scale replacement full scale replacement of primary research is not happening, and I don't think should be happening. So even leading vendors are careful here. Synthetic research is really great for testing things before investing in primary research, and also, in combination with primary research. But full-blown replacement is overhyped. Um, Also, most accurate personas. There's a lot of personas coming out across the space, HCP personas, patient personas, all these different personas here. When it comes to these personas, I would just say the key thing to ask is, what data were they built off of, and how were these personas validated? So, and any of these personas coming out without benchmarks are, problematic. Automated coverage decisions, we talked about this as well. The United Healthcare, again, is still very much in the forefront with the lock-in case in terms of reshaping what's defensible. We are seeing AI-driven processes, but denials without clinical review have like serious legal exposure that I don't think we're going to see that happen, nor do we want to see that happening. And then this one's kind of funny. Even today, I saw something pop up saying, I forget which firm, but that they had built a fully automated AOR end to end that could do all these magical things within 3 days. This is largely hype. There's definitely gains again to be had from agentic content production and speeding up times and efficiencies there. But folks claiming, 80 or 100% automated marketing agencies, that's far from reality. So overall, the line between these things are moving fast. Everything with AI is moving fast right now. What matters right now is the discipline to know, to have a good understanding, and to, I think, stay grounded and focused in, where the value is, where it makes sense to spend your time, and how AI is being validated and governed in these different situations.
Right. Christy, one follow-up question for you before we move on. Looking at all these use cases on this slide, right, as AI tools become easier to deploy in these areas, the risk is that different functions build their AI solutions in silos, right? How should pharma companies think about balancing speed and piloting with the need for enterprise-wide standards, shared infrastructure, and governance, across their organization?
That's a great question. What I would recommend is maybe having a central AI sort of team that can kind of drive advocacy across different areas and bring thoughts together. So you want some degree of centralization while also, I think, reaping to some extent the benefits of experimentation and distributed sort of innovation. So you don't want to have too much of a centralized approach that it like stifles innovation and adoption of AI tools. But you don't want everything to be happening in silos, to your point. So I think the key thing is really setting up proper governance, and guardrails is kind of like the hot topic term right now. But for employees to work safely with AI, to enable them and educate them on AI, particularly not just saying, hey, here's AI, use it for whatever you want to use it. Go through all of the key functions in the organization and, you know, work with them from a centralized team to see, hey, where can you be, where does it make sense to be automating things or augmenting things, and where does it make sense for things to be still fully human driven, right? So hopefully that answered, but my suggestion would be to have some sort of central team that works with all the different teams and enables them, and having the guardrails and teaching, the guardrails and the education and the enablement of everyone, so you can kind of have a balance of centralization and alongside like distributed innovation.
Right,
To
right. No,
build
thanks for
off what
that.
Chrissy was saying, I'm just when you mentioned guardrails, it made me think of so many discussions we have around what can be shared from a medical to commercial and that divide. And those guardrails are important. They're critical from a compliance perspective, but they can also be a challenge when people try to bring all data sets together and say, let's pull all this together. So exactly to what Christy's point, I've seen a number of clients have this question around, well, how do I bring that medical and commercial? Where can I? And that's where the governance comes in, having that the best practice around what can we share and what should be integrated within one system. And so we can have that full view. And what do we have to actually keep separate because there's compliance around what commercial and what medical can see. So the guardrails are the ones we're used to in pharma, but they continue
Mhm.
really within the
Yeah.
AI world.
Yeah, it's certainly something that it's an organization-wide effort, right? And you have to collaborate across the different lines in order to really make it work internally and externally, right? So, Chrissy, thanks for those insights. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you later in the roundtable discussion. Next up, we're going to dive deeper into the market access rabbit hole. As most of you know firsthand, market access is it's broad, right? We're talking about things like coverage, reimbursement, evidence, outcomes, payer engagement, contracting, um, patient and provider support, right? The list goes on. So it is something that is as wide as it is deep. Amanda and Anna are going to share some of their perspectives on where AI is or could be creating the most immediate changes and value in market access. I'll turn it over to Anna, to Amanda right now, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Herman. Yeah, so when we decided to do this webinar, one of the first things that we had to think about as a team is what do we want to talk about in terms of using AI in our world, but also as consultants, like what does this mean for us, right? I think about my first use of AI was taking my dog and putting like two cucumbers on his eyes, for a cute picture, seeing what I'm going to look like when I'm 90. And that was my use of AI 2 years ago, right? Like absolutely no foundation and just trying to figure it out like everybody else. But being on this side of the world in consulting, we have to really think about what our clients want and how they want to use AI, and also how their relationships with us are changing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that before Anna goes into some of the things that we've been thinking about on the side of it. So the first thing is, I think the number one question we get is from people now is, what can AI do? So if you're going to work on a project with us, what can we use AI for to make the project cheaper, simpler, faster, right? That's kind of the first thing everybody thinks about. And as we're going to talk a little bit today, and going into things like dossiers or systematic literature reviews, it sounds great in theory to have a lot of those things done automatically, or have AI kick out a lit search for you, but we still find a lot of errors and things, right? And it's just not perfect yet. And I don't know if it ever will get to the point where we will take out the human eye or the human review of information. So I think for us as consultants, we want to think about how to be more efficient for our clients, but we also want to think about ways that we can use AI to help streamline our work, but I don't think the human eye is completely replaceable on a lot of these things. The other thing that we have to think about too is legal medical considerations. I think Susan, you just raised a really good one, that we have to think about not just sharing information across companies between your commercial and your scientific teams and what can be shared that way, but also what can be shared between pharmaceutical companies and the vendors that support them. So we get a lot of clients that come to us and want to do really innovative things and want to think about new ideas and ways that they can pull information together. But there's two hurdles they have to think about. Number one is, how comfortable is your legal medical review process going to be, or that whole take a project from concept and bring it forward? Are we going to be allowed to do those things? So I think as you'll see some of these these ideas and concepts that we're talking about today, not all of these are always possible to put in front of an LMR and have them approved, right? So let's say we want to make something, and one of the things I've been thinking a lot about with our team is, can we put something in the field that, we go to a doctor's office, we personify the doctor's office. This doctor's office has this patient mix of this percent commercial, this percent Medicaid, this percent Medicare, other. You should develop materials for this office that talk this way. But this office is a little bit different. It's in a different area. It has a different common language spoken, different higher Medicaid patients, patient population, a completely different environment. Should you have information written differently for that office? So you want to go through and create really interesting ways to, we could, talk to all these offices in different ways and come up with new things. But if you can't get those through the review process or find a way to automate them that your LMR is going to approve, that's going to be challenging. So I think as we look at some of these ideas or ways that we want to use AI, we have to think about what would our legal teams let us do to make sure that what we're putting out is meeting the needs and the requirements of the corporation that you're working under, and what can also go on into the field and be accurate. And then also, we get a lot of questions from our clients too and one of the things that Anna's going to show today is a payer persona. And Christy, you just talked about all those things. How do you benchmark something that you create in a persona? How do you do an analysis to make sure that the information that you're creating in a persona is good? Well, there's also legal challenges there because us as vendors can't just take information that we all learn from different clients, right, in every project and load it all into a big pot and come up with answers. We have to think about how do we share that information back and forth to be able to give everybody in our industry valuable information, but to make sure that we're protecting all of the confidentiality. So I think this is going to be very similar to when we first figured out camera phones and where can you take them and how can you use them and all these different things that we've had to grapple with over the past 20, 30 years that have come in as technology. Is we're very tight right now on what we're willing to share across companies, but are we going to have to loosen those reins as everybody's going to want more and more information from different sources? So it's that commercial to scientific consideration, it's company to company, it's industry to industry, and it's what legally can be done. So as we kind of talk through these ideas, those are some of the things that we grapple with as vendors, wanting to bring really unique services to everybody and think about using AI differently in market access, but it just puts these challenges that we're going to have to work through over the next few years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anna to talk through some of the things that we've got going on.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So we're going to be focusing on the payer perspective of market access in this next section and the emerging role that AI has. So it's important to start by acknowledging, of course, that payer decision making is inherently multidimensional and highly variable across organizations. And by this, I mean that payers are not evaluating products through just a single lens, but rather they are simultaneously considering a number of things: a product's clinical value, comparative evidence, budget impact, feasibility at the operational level, and broader policy or regulatory considerations. And so what really makes market access particularly complex is that these factors are not weighted consistently across different payer segments or even across decision makers within the same organization. So, for example, some payers may place greater emphasis on affordability and while others may focus more heavily on the maturity of evidence presented or the durability of a treatment's clinical benefit, or a product's alignment with existing treatment pathways. So, as a result, similar products can receive very different coverage outcomes depending on the type of payer, the organization's priorities and internal risk tolerance, and the broader reimbursement environment. So, from a market access and evidence planning perspective, this variability can really create a significant challenge for organizations because organizations are not simply trying to determine whether a product will be covered, but they're really trying to understand what evidence will matter most to payers, what concerns payers are likely to have, and how different payer segments may interpret the same product profile differently. So, when we think about the evolving role of AI in market access specifically, one of the challenges that organizations are increasingly facing is that AI, or that AI may help alleviate, is that many important market access and evidence-related decisions occur before full payer research efforts can be completed. So that may include launch planning, evidence generation prioritization, pricing and contracting strategies, and planning in the early pipeline phase. And the teams that are tasked with these efforts are often operating within accelerated business timelines. They may have limited research budgets, and there's just the inherent need to evaluate multiple strategic scenarios concurrently. So, within those contexts, there is growing interest in whether AI-enabled approaches can help organizations simulate different directional payer perspectives earlier and then incorporate those insights into strategic decision making. So, for example, um, how different payer segments may evaluate the same product profile, where access barriers may emerge, and then how changes in evidence, pricing, or positioning could a payer's response. So that's a echo what Amanda and Chrissy spoke to earlier, in that the role of AI is really not intended to replace primary research with payer stakeholders. It's really about supporting that more structured strategic assessment in situations where organizations need this sort of directional perspective quickly.
Oh, if I can just add, this is definitely something we get from
Oh, sorry.
a lot of like if investment firms are looking at assets, they might want some kind of quick hits or insights from us, and using some of these directional things can be really helpful. So that's definitely an area that we see value in using AI insights and shaping the market. 100%, very, very common. I do think with some of this work though, and I think you're going to talk a little bit and get a little bit more into the payer, is getting into the mind of a payer. Sometimes when you do market research, you hear one thing once and then you hear it on the second interview, and by the fourth or fifth interview you've kind of reached information saturation, and then sometimes you're hearing a gazillion different things, right, from every single payer in a different reaction. So that's just where it gets tricky, right? And that kind of just goes back to, I just want to point that out, getting us back to that point I said earlier of, a lot of this is new. We're trying to figure out how to validate this information and pull this information in. And sometimes I think it can be challenging depending on the product, potentially how new it is, how unique it is, or if it's something that maybe you might expect a more consistent reaction from. So that's some of the stuff that we're trying to adjust for in our work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So we've been thinking about these AI applications primarily through the lens of payer-related strategic decision support. And one area in which AI can help structure and apply payer intelligence is evidence strategy and prioritization. And you'll see that fourth box down in the lower right-hand corner is about that investment planning that Amanda just spoke to. So we'll cover that here in just a second. Um, but organizations are often trying to determine what types of evidence are most likely to matter to payers, where gaps may arise and create access risk for patients, and how limited evidence generation resources should be allocated. We will review the platform that we've been working on here shortly. That really, we're trying to mitigate some of that through that platform. Another area where AI can help structure and apply payer intelligence is communication and positioning of products. So different payer segments may respond differently to a product's value narrative, and AI-enabled approaches may help organizations evaluate maybe where a message is likely to resonate versus where it may generate scrutiny or skepticism from one payer perspective or multiple payer perspectives. And we also see that there's an application in access scenario assessment. So by this, we mean that AI may anticipate likely UM approaches that payers may suggest, evidence thresholds that really matter to payers, or reimbursement challenges across different payer segments. And as Amanda mentioned, finally, organizations are increasingly interested in applying these approaches earlier in development to inform broader portfolio and investment planning or acquisition evaluations. So, an example of how Magnolia is applying AI in market access through a payer persona platform that we have developed that reflects payer decision-making behavior. And this platform is grounded in primary payer research that we have conducted and observed payer decision behavior patterns, also policy analysis and real-world coverage patterns. It's as Christy mentioned before, the intent with these platforms is not to create synthetic AI payers or stakeholders, but rather to structure and apply recurring payer evaluation patterns that we as researchers have observed in a more systematic way in specific resource or time-constrained contexts. Um, with respect to the platform, each persona in this framework reflects a defined payer decision context, including, and you can see in that second box, the specific payer segment. So whether the payer, the breakdown of books of business by, commercial, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, the payer's functional role, so whether they're a medical or a pharmacy director, and the persona's decision orientation, or how that specific payer generally approaches the evaluation of a product. Some personas are more budget focused, others are more evidence oriented, or really value RWE, or are maybe more operationally focused or policy driven. And then the outputs generated by these personas that we've developed are designed to approximate likely decision patterns, including anticipated coverage decisions, approaches, or factors that may drive or limit access to a treatment.
Yeah, and if I can just add one thing to this too. So as everyone who's been joining these webinars for the past few years as we've been doing them, we don't intend this to be like a salesy webinar by any means where we're trying to show you like some platform and oh my gosh, you have to buy this. So I just want to say that as we're walking through it, this is just something that we've been working on that we find fascinating, the way that we've designed it. And I think it's kind of the way that the market is moving in terms of people looking at and thinking through the personas. So you'll see as Anna kind of gets into the weeds on it, but we just wanted to set that up as a disclaimer that our goal today is to kind of talk through how do you use this? What do you do with it? How do you think through these things, and not intended to be like a sales pitch. So I just wanted to say that, as we always hope these are more informational and get people thinking about new ways to use data or use things in our environment. So just wanted to put that out before we hop to the next
Yeah.
one.
Thanks. Yeah, and we will speak here, to the limitations of any of these persona platforms here in just a few slides. One of the consistent findings across payer research that we have baked into the development of this platform is that payer decisions do tend to follow recognizable patterns in decision-making behavior. So some organizations we have found are primarily focused on affordability and budget predictability. Others, as I mentioned, place much greater emphasis on the rigor of evidence presented, the durability of a product's clinical benefit, or the methodological strength of a trial design, while others really are more operationally focused. So they're really concerned with the implementation complexity of a product or its administrative burden. And others are heavily influenced by policy, precedent, so how other products in a class may have been covered, and regulatory considerations. And those underlying orientations can influence coverage postures, restrictions in access, evidence expectations, and then sensitivity to pricing or contracting. So in developing these personas, and we'll walk through one here on the next slide, we organize those observed decision patterns into structured frameworks that can then be applied to different strategic questions that clients may have.
And just for the record, we did note that these payers looked way too cool to be payers because we've worked and talked with a lot of payers, and we all know in market access we're kind of a nerdy lot, but they are definitely way too cool looking.
Yeah,
So we're hoping to make
they're
them like I think we need like pocket protectors with one or like a pharmacist jacket or something. But yes,
yeah,
they're a good looking group.
they're all ridiculously good looking. So
Yes.
this is an example of one of the ridiculously good-looking payer personas we've developed within our framework. So in this case, the persona, the who is the budget guardrail formulary strategist, reflects a decision-making posture that's particularly focused on, of course, affordability, budget predictability, and So that's just one of 10 personas that we have developed. Um, so the platform itself can evaluate a range of materials that are input into it or uploaded that are guided by a provided broader research objective. And the materials that this platform can include, or set the materials that this platform can evaluate include product profiles, publications, trend reports, or existing coverage policies. And then the persona then interprets those materials through their defined decision-making lens. So, for example, this particular payer's orientation may focus heavily on the eligible population size, with respect to a specific treatment, the risk of utilization expansion, affordability, and then mechanisms for controlling their organization's financial exposure. So again, the intent is not to predict exact payer decision making with certainty, but rather to provide, a more structured way of evaluating how different payer perspectives may interpret the same product profile or an evidence package.
And I think this is where it goes a little bit into what I was saying earlier on is we have that struggle of, we talk to payers all the time. That's what we do. And what can you pull into here? And some payers even now, I think in some of their contracts are saying, we don't want our information put into chatbots. So we have to think about ways we can leverage information to come into these is what can you take from the work you've done? What can you take from payer interviews? What can you take from past work? What can you take from public resources? And how do you use that information to build this up? So, as we said earlier, you want to have something like this to be very predictable, but what are companies going to have to grapple with in terms of the kind of information that they're going to share? So are you as a pharmaceutical company going to send a giant pile of all the market research you've done in the past 10 years to your consultant, right, and your vendor, and they're going to load that all in and try to run something like this? Or is industry going to get to a point where we're going to have the types of things where, okay, we've got this information, it's got proprietary in it, but we as an industry have said we need to start working with payers a bit better. How do we pump this information in or be able to use it in a safe way that we're not sharing confidential information across companies, but we're able to build out these types of personas? So this is only as good as the information we can feed it. And I think that's where the challenge is going to be for us in the next few years is what is your legal group going to allow, right? What is your legal team? What is your contract going to let you put into here to build something like this or to be able to use something like this? And how are we going to get the most out of that for you, right, as you're looking into this? So these are the things that we think about all the time, right? And I want as everyone's looking at these types of data sets or resources and things that they are seeing from a lot of different companies out there, I think those are the kinds of questions you should ask. As Christy said earlier, how are they validating the information? What are they feeding into it? How are they using previous work or work you've done? Because again, you can't just pull things from a million places, pop it into this and use it. So I think those are the things a lot of companies want to come up with, like the next cool gadget, but might not necessarily have the right data going into it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think the
Thank you.
benefit is you
Oh,
guys are the experts in this space and have been doing this for so long. So we definitely, have that edge there. But to your point, the more we can be collaborating with folks, the better these products become. So
thank you. Yeah. Um, so one of the areas that we have found most compelling and exciting while developing this platform is considering how these different outputs from the payer persona may support multiple stages of the product lifecycle. So the as we have mentioned, these outputs are intended to reflect likely payer decision patterns that include anticipated coverage considerations of products, likely UM approaches, possible evidence gaps or areas for refinement of evidence, or areas where payers may raise objections or concerns. This platform also supports how pressure testing variations in evidence, pricing, positioning, or contracting assumptions may alter payer feedback using those different decision lenses. And from an application standpoint, we can see potential relevance across multiple phases in the product lifecycle, including in launch planning, the evidence generation phase, pricing and reimbursement strategy, communication of a product's value, and then pipeline planning. And as we have developed this platform, we, of course, have kept the limitations of AI in mind that Christine and Amanda both have spoken to. So from our perspective, really, AI appears most useful when applied to structuring and synthesizing existing intelligence, identifying those recurring payer decision patterns, and supporting evaluation across multiple strategic scenarios. And yeah, and at the same time, human interpretation remains essential in this work, and its importance really can't be understated. The context and the why behind decision making is critical in market access, as we know, and organizational nuance, internal risk tolerance, evolving policy environments, changing evidence standards, and more nuanced coverage and reimbursement scenarios often require interpretation beyond any structured framework. And these decisions really are difficult to infer purely from historical behavior. So we view this AI-enabled payer platform or payer persona platform as complementary to and not a replacement for primary payer engagement and expert judgment. Its value really is in improving scalability, efficiency around strategic assessment, and consistency. And longer term implications, finally, I think the broader opportunity in the long term is less about automation and more about alignment, specifically better alignment between evidence generation, access strategy, pricing, and real world payer expectations. Um, Over time, as Christy and Amanda both mentioned, AI approaches may help organizations evaluate payer implications earlier in product development, identify potential access risks before a product's launch, and also support more iterative strategic planning over time. But I also think there's an opportunity to make better use of existing payer intelligence, particularly given how much institutional knowledge often exists across organizations. But it can be difficult to operationalize consistently. Sorry. So the longer term implication may ultimately be a more structured and scalable framework for applying payer insights across the product life cycle, but a lot remains to be seen in this space.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna and Amanda, for sharing those deeper thoughts. We do have before we move to the last section, we do have one question from the audience. So we've been talking about the U.S. healthcare system, right? The question is, can the payer tool can that be used for global market access, right? And if not, like what things do you would need to be in place in order to make that happen?
question. Anna, you want me to take it or you want to take it?
You can start and I'll chime in. Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah, actually, I think some of the global stuff might be easier because so much of that's public knowledge, the way that they post a lot of the assessments, and the way that other countries have more of a public process and the way that they set prices and cover products. So I certainly think you could do something like this 100%. Develop a tool similarly to this and almost have it as like different countries as evaluation. But I actually think it might end up being an easier build because of that publicly available a world we have that we just don't have here in the US. I do think things like as Christy mentioned earlier, like iPay, right? You're going to see some of these reports come out, like the federal government released some data on their negotiation and how they picked the prices. It wasn't great. It wasn't wonderful information. They redacted a ton of things, but like those kinds of things in the US could be helpful for us to think about like contract negotiations at some point, or what you might expect to see the private payer do to react to the commercial payer. But yeah, a global world, you just have so much more of that information out there already.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. HTA decisions being publicly available would, that this would be an intuitive context for a global payer persona, and also often outside the U.S. resource constrained environments are pretty common. So there might not be, um, sufficient funding for a typical traditional primary payer research study. So I think, yeah, this would be a good fit for that.
Yeah, and I will say too, for those of you on the webinar, like we are testing these concepts. If you and I can send or we got our email. I replied to someone who was asking about if we're putting the slides out. Hopefully you can see it, but we'd love to talk to people if they'd like to run a test or check something out, because that's what we're doing right now. We're validating and learning how can you make this thing smarter. So if you're somebody who's like, hey, I'd like to ask this question and just see what we can get, please send me an email or reach out to us, or you can send it to the info at magnoliamarketaccess.com, and that's how we make it better, right? We've been currently validating and testing. We've taken projects we've done before, right, and tested against them and done all these things. But if we do that, right, that's how we make it smarter. So always happy to partner with people as we're making it better, but also seeing what types of information we can pull for them.
Fantastic. So we've got about 10 minutes left in the webinar. And so we want to move to our last segment and then close with a panelist discussion, right? As much as we can in the time that we have left. And open it up to the floor. For that discussion, Susan, I did want to start with you. And kind of talk about pharma, kind of AI in the more of kind of the broader kind of pharma space, right? Your team does a lot of variety, does a different variety of work, data-driven work, right?
Mhm.
And patient identification and rare diseases, all the way to payer influencer mapping for manufacturers. So that means you're often turning fragmented data signals into decisions that access teams can actually act on, right? So where do you see AI doing the best job of turning just messy, ambiguous, and just dirty healthcare data, right, into actionable insights? And what do you think the human element, or the human interpretation kind of plays in that the most?
Absolutely. So, to your point, we do a lot of work, and this is 81QD within the medical knowledge group, do a lot of work leveraging AI today. We've been working in the AI space, very much more the predictive AI versus generative AI, but definitely in the predictive AI space for more than 10 years, leveraging AI to identify those signals within the data, and to identify who are the key influencers and who are the undiagnosed patients, let's say, for a rare disease. And when you add in generative AI, which is what people, I think now, when they say the word AI, that's often what people mean. I mean, you get the ability to synthesize the data even more. You get the ability to start with a core model, and then you leverage that Gen AI to expand the features within the model, to look more broadly and ask questions, and understand some of the nuances, what's driving certain spikes within the model. The challenge, I would say, with AI though, is when it comes to that synthesis of the data, AI does a great job of pulling together many disparate sets and giving you that average. And it flattens to somewhat of a mean, where with data analytics, you want some of those spikes. You want to understand what's really driving an interest in a specific area, what's driving a patient challenge within the patient journey. Where are the particular key stakeholders? where they speaking at conferences, as an example. AI will often Gen AI, to be clear, will often pull things together and do a great job with a story, do a great job with that synthesis. But what it's missing is the spikes, and that's where we really drive the that human element to make sure that you have somebody checking the model, checking what the inputs into that model, but also just understanding that when the synthesis comes back, are there areas that we're missing that are relevant for the client that are more medically and clinically driven that AI may have lost. So we ensure that while we've been in this space a long time from the predictive,
Mhm.
now leveraging Gen AI to expand our models, we still have that human element throughout, checking,
Yes.
refining, and
Mhm.
continue to make sure that we identify those spikes.
Right, right. So those use cases that you just talked about, right? They give you very precise looking outputs, but the underlying data, right? There's always a chance that it's incomplete, right? It's biased or
Mm,
it's delayed. So how do you prevent AI-driven analytics, right, from creating false confidence or just flat out wrong answers, right? Especially when users are relying on that data to influence targeting access strategies, right, and resource allocation. Is it really just the
definitely.
human overlay that to ensure, nothing gets through the gaps that way?
Um, yeah, so the human is core, to your point in terms of, but even
Mhm.
within that human, it's also leveraging our knowledge of AI to ask the right questions in terms of, are you checking things, ensuring in that prompt you're saying things like, do not hallucinate, do not make things up, only use the data that's there. When we say AI too, what's amazing, but also exciting is if you think about Gen AI, the tools that we often use, Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, you ask the same question to those three models, you get three different answers. Right. And different synthesis. You ask the same question to that same model, you'll still get different answers. Right. That's where you need the human element to make sure that you're asking that right question. You're tweaking, you're adjusting, but also reviewing. But that's also where, and there are a lot of articles this week about how, this the AI demise of all jobs and everything was probably
Yeah.
it was overplayed.
Mhm.
I think the best term is, yeah, what's it? The reports of my death are much exaggerated. Same thing with the data analysts. You still need the data analysts. You still need the humans to do that work because there are these mistakes. AI makes the work better, though. I mean, what's exciting is that when you're using Claude and within the model and you're using it to ask these different questions, you are able to pull in more, but it also intensifies the work, right? And that's also the part where it's not just the corrections, it's the ability for the human to take that piece and say, let's dig further. Let's keep on going down this path and tell me what you can find. And that's what we
Yeah,
enjoy doing.
I think you're absolutely right. I think a couple of days ago, two of the biggest voices in AI, right?
Yeah,
OpenAI and Anthropic. They were all about the employee apocalypse, right? Job
yeah,
apocalypse, and they walked that back pretty hard, right? The
exactly.
question is why, I think there's situations. I think people are thinking, AI can eliminate jobs, right? But is it going to actually reshape jobs instead, right? You think
Exactly.
about something like Microsoft Excel. When that came out, bookkeepers, right, clerical work was supposed to be gone, right? And look at it now, right? The use
Hmm.
case, you can probably make an argument that expands jobs, right? And the use cases and the ideas, right, kind of flow from being accessible to more ideas, right, on technology.
100%.
One question to the broader panel here. I probably have time for one question, right? And there is one question in the chat too that I want to get back to before we leave as well. The impact, right, of AI is going to be felt differently across manufacturers. Do you think that rapid AI progress within our industry, right, could create or widen the gap between large life science companies and smaller biotechs, right? A situation of the have and the have-nots, right? In terms of resources, like subject matter expertise and even funding. Does that gap exist, right? Could it widen, right? And how would you advise manufacturers on dealing with that?
You want me to speak to that, or well,
Go for it.
I'm curious others' thoughts, more specifically on the space. I can speak more generally. I think that smaller companies do have a somewhat of an advantage now with AI, especially if they're sort of supercharging their employees. And when it comes to um, pharma leveraging AI to advance things. Obviously, some of the big players are going to have a lot of money to, spend on some of those things. But I have also seen a number of, platforms coming out that can enable smaller companies to do, drug discovery through AI and all of that as well. Um, so I think it's a bit of both. I think that larger companies are now having to us like reassess things and where they're getting the most value. Whereas you're seeing like smaller companies in the tech space where they're doing like 1 million in revenue per employee. So there is a real opportunity to be lean if you supercharge your employees and if you invest a lot, I think, in the AI driven piece of it. So I think like that investment with a smaller team can go quite far. So I think both sides have different advantages, and I think the smaller players do have leverage here in certain areas. But I'm curious others thoughts that are, plugged in more directly to the space.
I can add to that. I actually exactly agree with what you were saying. I think actually smaller companies may be able to do more. And I think it goes back to what I've been kind of harping on this entire hour is the risk-taking behavior of companies of what are you willing to put out there and do a little bit differently. And I do think some of the larger companies may be more conservative in their approach and their use of it, where some of these newer companies might come in and their whole life is based on their whole existence is based on the use of AI. What if you are using that to discover a molecule and that's how your whole company was built? You're going to have a different mindset. So maybe this is going to be like when I was in college and a bunch of my engineering friends dropped out and started their businesses and became, mega millionaires because they were out there doing things that no one else was. With the whole .com boom, it's almost like are we going to see a little bit of that? So I would say I think we're going to definitely see companies have to loosen up the reins a little bit if they want to keep up with some of the smaller ones.
Right.
Although a lot
Yeah,
of our larger clients do have really cool like groups that are working on it. I just think we're going to move slower at the larger company level.
yeah, absolutely. So I think we have one question from the audience. They can probably close out the webinar with this one, and then and I'll let you shut things down. The question is, can you describe the question just went away.
I think it was on the validation process that
Oh yeah. So can you describe the validation process for your pair personas and accuracy in modeling likely product decisions? So the validation, right, for the personas is like how were those developed? How were they tested and kind of gut checked, right, for sensibility and reasonableness.
Yeah. So the platform is based off of institutional knowledge, so transcripts from payer research that we've done, and then we have validated. We are currently in the process of validating the platform, but we validated the outputs of the personas, and compared them to findings from interviews that we did with real payers. So Christy and Amanda and I will be working on a full validation of this, as we continue to just refine it and really get it ready for launch here.
All right. We are at time, a minute over. Thank you to all the panelists for contributing to the discussion here. Thank you all for joining, those of you still with us. Our webinar topic next month is it's a blueprint for patient support, tailored approaches that deliver right and patient access. And so, again, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month as well. Have a good day, everyone.